Mother Nature may deliver savage blows with tsunamis and earthquakes. The death tolls, all too often incomprehensible. Yet unexpected as these disasters are, we know nature's unsympathetic hand. Evolution of life's strict underlying theme of the survival of the fittest. So we try to understand. We help. We rebuild. We're resilient. And above all, we learn. Natural disasters aside, New York's emergency services paid an awful price. For the survivors, though, this wasn't simply a case of living to fight another day. Sure, they could go back to their families and gradually come to terms with the unbridled horror of so many fallen comrades. But how does one cope with such an inordinate level of mental anguish? Bad enough to go through what they did, but to then be treated with contempt by the press and public alike. How do you think that feels? You see, their testimonies have been ignored, and hardly anyone seems to care. How can it possibly be? For any investigation, these were crucial expert eyewitness accounts. In the documentary Loose Change, firemen state that when they arrived on the scene, they couldn't believe the carnage on and near the ground floor. Several spoke of explosions going off everywhere, yet none of this made the mainstream press. Moreover, the story that was being told to the general public conflicted greatly with what those on the scene were saying. How does one begin to fathom the unfathomable? The emergency workers know what happened that day. They also know they've been gagged. So when I talk of mental anguish, how does one live with the knowledge that their comrades were quite literally sent to their deaths by the Bush administration? The survivors know this, and that sure must be a hard pill to swallow. As is the fact that for the perpetrators, the whole operation was successful, even though they made some schoolboy errors in the cover-up. Bush and his brothers, Marvin and Jeb, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and owner of the Twin Towers, Larry Silverstein, planned the whole thing. So much for the home of the brave and the land of the free. Of course, many more had to have been involved. Before delving any further, though, I'd like to just mention a minor detail about firefighters, something that for 10 years few have pointed out. You see, we all know what they do, but has everyone forgotten that they are also the best experts in the world when it comes to knowing if it's safe to go into a building, or if it's about to collapse? Several families of 9/11 victims filed suit. Naturally, they were horrified. Eyewitness accounts were being cast aside. Worse still, it soon became apparent that though the mass media was speaking to all involved, the only views aired on TV were those perpetuating the administration's take. Alas, after a long battle, on August the 12th, 2005, the family succeeded in securing the release of a collection of accounts made soon after 9/11. Here are three. Firefighter Richard Banasiski was in the South Tower. He said, I quote, "It seemed like on TV when they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions." Assistant Fire Commissioner Stephen Gregory said, and I quote, "I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building." Paramedic Daniel Rivera said, and I quote, "It was like a professional demolition where they set the charges on certain floors and then you hear pop, 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 pop." Could you please tell me what earthly reason these people would have in making all this up? What ulterior motive could they possibly have? These guys are professional, for Christ's sake. They were right there in the thick of it, and no one has any damn right to doubt what they were and still are saying. One thing must be made absolutely clear. There's no possible chance Bush and his cronies could have carried out these heinous acts without the full cooperation of the mainstream media. This was imperative. If media networks had complete freedom, then surely all the accounts of people directly connected with 9/11, along with the testimonies from demolition experts, pilots, architects, engineers, one could go on, would have been heard. Had this been the case, in no time the plot would have unravelled, thus exposing the true conspirators. To give you some idea of the scale of suppression, please type in patriotsquestion911.org. There you'll see the sworn testimonies of 220 senior military, intelligence service, law enforcement and government officials, 1,400 statements from engineers and architects, 250 statements from pilots, air traffic controllers and aviation professionals, 400 statements from professors, 300 statements from 9/11 survivors and family members, 200 statements from artists, entertainers and media professionals, and 400 statements from medical professionals, along with the statements of 41 US counterterrorism and intelligence agency veterans. Every single one of their accounts challenge the official account of 9/11 head on. America's most famous and respected news presenter was the genial Dan Rather. For 23 years he was CBS's anchorman. He sat for hours in a vain attempt to make head or tail of the horror to his US audience. Later in discussion he remarked, "These look like controlled demolitions, don't they?" Days passed and Rather began citing the obvious flaws in what effectively was the administration's account of what happened. However, quickly he discovered that questioning those supposedly responsible for the safety of its citizens, the very people who'd failed miserably, wasn't going to be tolerated by his superiors. The word was, George W. didn't like what he was saying. Rather was fired. Remember the Watergate scandal? Though incomparable in its enormity to 9/11, the fact the Washington Post succumbed to the persistence of but two of their journalists, Woodward and Bernstein, eventually resulted in exposure of the cover-up, indictments, convictions, prison terms, and finally President Nixon's resignation. Only now, thanks to WikiLeaks, an international non-profit organisation, and the sheer bravery of its director, Julian Assange, we can see the true picture of what's really happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. Recently, John Pilger highlighted this in his superb documentary, The War You Don't See. Please try and watch it. Of course you don't have to. You may wholeheartedly believe that Tony Blair's intention was to create democracy in Iraq. Well, he never told the truth about WMDs and he never gave a damn about democracy in Zimbabwe. In any case, what business is it of ours to create democracy or rid Iraq of Saddam Hussein? No question he was an evil man, but this is not our job. It's for the Iraqi people to sort out. Look what's happening in Egypt now. Its people aren't happy with their rulers and they're letting them know about it. And remember, when it suited the West, we helped Saddam. We were for the best part responsible for him being there. Iraq was a prosperous, beautiful country with a superb infrastructure. Its people were good, well-meaning folk. It had nothing like the crime and drug problems we have in the West. Look at it now. It's been reduced to rubble. At least 1 million innocent civilians have lost their lives. Millions more rendered homeless. And to add insult to injury, every single day, huge American oil tankers leave Iraqi ports laden to the brim with their oil. Its very lifeblood sucked clean by the people responsible for 9/11. If ever there were a case of the grandest of larcenies, this was it. And make no mistake, they're going to try and steal every last drop. So much for your democracy, Blair. So it's your choice. If you're undecided but you believe you're a caring person with a good heart, what harm can giving up an hour of your time do? I can tell you, powerful people in the US are doing all they can to stop you listening to what Julian Assange is trying to say. A quote used, "whatever it takes," just so you don't see his work. And more to the point, the disgraceful, trigger-happy operations of the US military. Mowing down thousands upon thousands of unarmed innocent civilians is not fighting a war. It's not fighting terrorism. It's plain, cold-blooded murder. True to form, Assange has had threats on his life, as well as being branded a child molester. Pilger, a man who will go down as a true giant of journalism and news reporting, knows the truth. He knows Mr. Assange as an honest, decent human being, and that these allegations are total fabrication, designed solely to discredit him in the eyes of as many people as possible. So if you want to understand how the press is leaned on, and so able to manipulate the truth, then watch Pilger's documentary, please. The War You Don't See. Two quotes from two former US presidents, the first an intellectual, the second an evil moronic fool, as well as without doubt the worst president in US history. Dissension is the greatest form of patriotism. Thomas Jefferson. These words from the great man referred for the need of nothing less than true democracy. You're either with us or you're against us. George W. Bush. If it was simply a case of choosing to be with or against Bush, these words would merely be the most reprehensible ever uttered by a US president. The agenda is firm and specific. No one working for CBS, NBC, Fox News, the BBC or Sky, for example, can make waves. Any article that goes some way to exposing all the lies we're being told will never be published. The journalist may lose his job. Even relatives of victims are treated appallingly. On the Bill O'Reilly show, Jeremy Glick dared to question how and why his father died. For me, it's a soul-destroying watch. Judge for yourself. It's on the internet. Skeptics are made to appear as flawed individuals. Dylan Avery, maker of Loose Change, a great documentary about 9/11, watched on the internet by millions all over the world. The BBC had the gall to label him a dropout in what was their shameful, pathetic effort to give both sides of the story. Martin Sheen and his son Charlie are but a few who dared to ask for a full independent inquiry. That's all. Now they're branded misfits. Former actor and governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, adamant 9/11 was an inside job, is shouted down on a radio show by two awful little specimens. Those brave enough to suggest there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, especially in America, suddenly find themselves tagged as unpatriotic. Since when was it unpatriotic to ask questions? Remember Thomas Jefferson's words. What for me is so astonishing is how so many of my friends, as well as the countless people I speak to, remain oblivious to the true power media barons possess, and more importantly, the impact they can have. I mean, look at the way our so-called elected representatives, our leaders for Christ's sake, go running to Rupert Murdoch, terrified the tax-dodging Aussie big shot may not be too pleased with what's on the itinerary. What a joke. Sadly, the press can make or break just about anyone, and they certainly can influence people's thoughts. A backlash against what countless climatologists and reputable scientists have been telling us for years, for instance, recently occurred in the press, with the ludicrous notion that man-made CO2 emissions essentially were not responsible for climate change. What unadulterated drivel! I like to bet these so-called experts had their wages swirled by lumpy backhanders for Mr. ExxonMobil and Mr. BP and the rest of that very greedy lot. Trouble is, even if only a few fall for it, many more of us lack the necessary judgment to dismiss this for what it is, and so doubt is created when there shouldn't be any. Bad enough the press is used as a tool by big business, and often what's printed hardly reflects what's occurring in the real world. But for crying out loud, let's not hinder the work of scientists, climatologists and oceanographers, etc. We're already playing a very dangerous game. And as every day passes, we are increasing the stakes. Professor Stephen Hawking once said words to the effect, make no mistake, if a species errs in its thinking and its methods, inevitably it will reduce its chances of long-term survival. Mankind has to pass the baton in the human relay race. To do that, we really must listen and react to what the cleverest people in the world are telling us.